And we're back to learning to code, and this time I'm going to walk you through the 4th course on freecodecamp.org. So it's this one under responsive web development. It's for building a registration form, and we've got 62 tasks. Let's just start a project. And here's our end result that we're going to create. At first we've got a couple of steps that are going to repeat HTML. We'll start with the typical doctype HTML tag. In step 2, we're going to add our HTML and add our first attribute. We need a language. We'll make it English. Step 3, we're going to create a head and a body inside of our HTML tags. Step 4, we need some meta information. At first the title, it's given its registration form. And for meta we'll use our char set as an attribute udf-8. So the typical stuff that you almost always need when you create a new website or a new project in HTML. Step 5, we're going to link our HTML to a CSS file. We need the link tag, the relation is style sheet, and as the href, it's given right here, it's styles.css. Be sure that you don't have a typo here. Close the tag, it's self-closing. And then the next step, we're going to add our first visible information, so visible in the browser window on the right hand side. It's an H1 and we'll use registration form right here, and we can see it popping up. Let's move on to step 7. We're going to add a paragraph, and the text is given below. Let's just copy paste it. We need the P element, and we need to close it. It's nested inside of our body, and we can move on to step 8. And you can see we now have our styles.css and the index.html. So we're going to add some CSS. And we'll start by giving our body a specific width and a specific height. On OK, I had to give this a different value. We'll use VH, so viewport height, and it's explained what it is above. Now we're going to add a margin of 0. When we get rid, watch the right hand side, what happens if I add the 0. So it makes our scroll bar disappear. Step 10. Let's add a background color to our body. A hex code for it is given. And we'll also change the color of our text, because now it's not visible, it's still there, so I can select it. Well, we can't see it. We need more contrast. So let's give it a different color. Step 11. Now we'll actually start creating our form. So we're done building the basic website. We need our form tag, it has a closing tag, and we're already going to use an action attribute. And the URL is given right here. So let me paste it. So this is where our form will actually, or would actually, send the information if a user puts it in. Let's start with the field set for our form. I can already see it in the browser window. We need 2 more, so copy paste it, and we've got 3 of these elements popping up. Step 13. We'll add a label to our first field set, and then we'll copy it. We need 4 in total, so Ctrl C, Ctrl V 3 times, so that we've got 4 labels with an opening and a closing tag. This won't change much in our browser display, so don't get confused. We haven't given it any information, therefore nothing will change on the right hand side. In step 14, we're going to change that. Here's the text that our label needs. And now it pops up on the right hand side. Labels are inline elements, so it's all on the same line. And in step 15, we're going to do something about it, so we're back to our styles.css. We've got a new unit, the REM, so it is the root EM. Don't get too confused by it. Best way to find out what these units do is to just try them out. So we'll add first our display block to our label elements to have it like this, so they're not inline anymore. Every label has a line for itself. And now we're going to add a margin. We can use EM and it looks like this. We'll add the 0. So the first 2 values are for top and bottom, the second 2 values are for left and right. And I've used EM instead of REM, so let me add the R for root EM. It won't change much in this specific example. Go back to our HTML. And we need our first input fields. So we've got our text for the label, and after the text we're going to have a single space, and then we'll add the input field, so the user can now put his name inside of the form. We need the same for the other 3 labels. Oh, and I've copied something here, so that was my mistake. You can see that I've mistakenly copied the entire code line instead of my input opening and closing tags. But this is what we need. So I can proceed to step 17. And we're going to link our input to our label elements. And this can be done with a for attribute inside of the label. As a value, we use first name. And the input now gets an ID with the same value. So ID equals first name. As you can see, input has now a closing tag in itself, and it was created by CodeCamp automatically, so this is another way to write opening and closing tags. Don't get confused by this. We'll add the for attribute 3 more times and change the value to last name, email and new password. And we'll have to do the same for the ID, so that all of these labels are connected to their specific input fields. And here you can see the indicator for the closing tag. It's inside of the opening tag now. And the final one, ID new password. Now we can move on to step 18. We're going to use the type attribute for our form elements. So by default we have a text type, or we can specify that. For example, for email and password, it makes sense in this example. For the first two, there are text types, but we're going to add it anyway. So for first and last name input tags, we now have a type text. For the email, we'll change it to email, and for the password, we're also going to change it. And that kind of restricts what the user can type in. For example, an email always has to have this add element and a dot, otherwise it's not going to get accepted. So you can, for example, type it in and omit the add, and you're now going to get a warning message thanks to this type attribute that we've set to email. Step 19. We're going to add our submit button. It is going to be placed after the last field set. So remember, we've got 3 field sets in total. And we can create it by using an input field. And we'll set the type to submit. My browser is set to German by default, so you have it set to a German text. But if we change the value to submit, we've got it like this. Be sure that you're using a capital S, otherwise freecodecamp will not allow you to get to step 20. Alright, let's add a required attribute to our input elements. And we'll need it in our first field set. We can simply add it right here after the type for our input. Let me copy it and I'll paste it into the other 3 input tags. And if we now want to submit something without putting any information into these fields, we're going to get a warning message. As I've said, my browser is set to German by default, so my warning message is German. But this is what this required attribute does. Step 21. We can also set the required characters in our input elements. Let us do so for the type email. So this is our third input tag inside of our first field set, and we're going to change it to minlength of 8, so it needs minimum 8 characters to be valid. So now the user has to set a password that has at least 8 characters. Let's move on to step 22. You can also use a pattern attribute. So let us add pattern equals our quotation marks, and now we use these brackets and we'll define a pattern, which is A to Z, so all of the characters from A to Z, and 0 to 5, so all of the numbers between 0 and 5. We don't need the minlength attribute anymore. We can delete it because we're going to add curly brackets right here and add 8 and a comma, which indicates that our minlength is 8 characters. Step 23. We'll jump to the next field set, so our second one, and we'll add new labels. We'll need 3 of them, so that's nothing new. Step 24. We're going to add input fields, give it the type radio, which is the radio button. Step 25. Our third label gets an input of type checkbox. And we'll make this required, so it needs to be checked. You can see we can, at least for now, check both of our radio buttons. And in a future step we're going to change it, but at first we're going to add some text in between our opening and closing input tag. So the first radio button is personal account, the second business account, and a checkbox I accept the terms and conditions. And you can see this simple space, it makes a difference. So don't forget it. Step 27. And now we're going to take care of our radio buttons and connect them. And we can do so with the attribute name. So if we give both of them the same name, the browser knows that they're connected, and we can only check one of them at a time. The value is given, it's account type, so I can just copy paste it. And now if I check one of them, the other one is going to get unchecked automatically. Step 28. We're going to link the input and the label once more. We've already done that for the first field set. So we've used the for attribute and the ID. Let's do that here as well. We'll do it for personal account. Afterwards for business account. And also for terms and conditions. Make sure that you write it the same way for your for attributes and the ID, otherwise it's not going to work. So it's a good idea to just copy it and then change the for to an ID attribute. That way I don't make a typo or something. And we can move on to step 29. And we're going to add a link. It should only be added to terms and conditions, so not the entire line. So make sure that you add the A tag right here. I will use an href attribute. The address is given right here, so I paste it. And then close your tag after the conditions. And we could now click on it and it would redirect us to this address. Step 30. We are already in our final field set. And we want to add an input that allows the user to upload a file, in this case a profile picture. And to do that, we're going to add the label. The input is nested inside. And for the input, we use a type that we haven't used before. And it's simply called file. And again, don't forget this little space right here. And here we could now click on it and upload a file. Once again, it's in German in my case. Don't get confused by this. Step 31. We'll add another label. And this one's going to be for age. Here's our text, we need the input. And we can use type number for it. Let me close it. And here you can already see we can adjust this number with down and up arrows. We give it minimum and maximum values, minimum 13, so we cannot go below that. And maximum 120. Technically, we could type in something that's outside of this range. For example, let me go to, I don't know, let's say 12. But the moment we go up to 13 and above, we can't go lower than this. And even if you would have written like 12 or 250, you couldn't submit it. Let's move on to step 32. On this time we're going to create kind of like a drop-down menu. So that's something new. And we use select an option for that. And it's basically used in the same way as label and input. So we use the select tag as a replacement for the label, and inside of it we'll nest our options. And we'll need 5 options in total. And if I now open this dropdown, you can see we've got 5 spaces already selected. We haven't given them any values yet, so they're going to be empty. But we're going to change that in the future. Let us nest our select inside of a label. And we'll put this text right here. Step 34. And now we're going to add these values to our options. The first one is shown by default. And if you click on the drop down, you can see the other ones. Step 35. We're going to give these options values, so if they're actually submitted, we know in the back end what was selected. First one can be empty, and then we go up from 1 to 4. So if the third option would have been selected, the value 3 would have been submitted to our target. Step 36, we're going to use a text area element. It's almost like an input element, but we're going to adjust its size. We're supposed to add it right here after our last label. We'll create a new one. Add this text. And here we need the text area, it's nested inside of the label. Don't forget the closing tag. Step 37. And we're going to link these elements once again. We've done that already for the 2 previous field sets. We need our for attribute and the ID, and it has to have the same value to be linked. This one might be tricky. Check the label before your select. And in this case, we'll need to add the ID to our select. So not to an option or something. You want to connect the label with your select tag right here. Let's jump to step 38. And now we can adjust the size of our text area, and we'll use rows and calls as attributes for that. And the values are given with 3 rows and 30 columns. Watch what happens on the right hand side. Step 39, we'll use the placeholder attribute. And we'll use it for our text area tag. And the text is given right here, so we paste it as a value for our placeholder attribute. It's going to disappear once we're typing something into the text box. Step 40. This one might be a little bit trickier. You'll have to understand what a submittable element is, and then we'll have to give it a name attribute. Except for our 2 radio buttons, so in the second field set. So at first, what is a submittable element? Don't get that confused. It's not our label, it's the input field. So what the user actually uses to submit information is the input, and this has to have a name. In our first field set, we're already good. In the second one, we've got our two radio buttons, so we don't need to adjust anything here. And the terms and conditions also has a name, so we're good in the second field set as well. Let's move on to the third. Here's our profile picture. The input doesn't have a name, so we'll have to add it right here. Let me just call it profile picture. Let's jump to the age. Here's our input for it. It doesn't have a name, so we add it. Let's call it age. Third one is our referrer. And what is the submittable element here? Well, it's the select. And it already has a name, so we don't need to add something here. The last one is the text area. It doesn't have a name. Let's add it. We'll call it bio. And this should be it. All of our submittable elements now have a name attribute. And we can move on. Step 41. We're back to our styles.css. And we are now going to style what we've created in the HTML. At first we'll change the font, use font family as a property, use Tahoma as a font. And watch it already changing in real time on the right hand side. Font size 16 pixels, and it's added to the entire body. Step 42. We're going to center our H1 and P elements. And you can select them both with a comma in between, curly brackets. As a property, we'll use the margin, 1 EM for top and bottom, and auto for left and right. And we are also aligning the text to the center. We'll use text align for that. And you can see that the H1 and the P element jump to the center. Step 43. We're going to select our form element, curly brackets. We use the margin property, set it to 0 for top and bottom and auto for left and right. And we use maximum and minimum width. If you have forgotten what the form is, it starts right here after the P and it goes down all the way to the bottom. Let us set the maximum width to 500 pixels. It doesn't matter how we resize this window, it won't get bigger than this. And the minimum width, we're going to set it to 300. And in between these values, we're going to use a width of 60 VW. And don't worry about the order or anything, it doesn't have an impact, so if I put the width right here, it won't change the display. Let's move on to step 44. So we need fieldset as a selector, border as a property. So I'm going to make the borders vanish and I add a padding of 2 rem. But we're going to get rid of the padding for left and right. You can target it like this. But it's much easier to use this way of writing. So 2 rem is now for top and bottom, and 0 is for left and right. Step 45. We're going to specifically target the border bottom. It's going to overwrite the border that we've set to none. Step 46. And we can use what is called a pseudo-class. So we can always use this last of type to select the last of type for a specific element. So if we apply it to the field set, we'll write it like this, then curly brackets. And we'll set the border bottom to none. So now only the border bottom of the last field set is affected. Now we can move on to step 47. Let's use our inputs, text area, and the select elements. What we are supposed to do is to make them take up the full width of their parent elements, and we'll do that. Now let me first add the margin. It's given, it's 10 pixels. And we can add our width by just setting it to 100%. And that's going to give us what we need. But the margin isn't supposed to be added to all directions, only to the top. So how can we write this? You can just target the margin top. Or we'll keep the margin and then add 3 zeros. So this is added now clockwise, top, right, bottom and left. And only the top has a value. Step 48. We're going to add a class. We're back in our index. And we're going to add it to the input tags right here. The class called inline. I can just copy paste it for the other input tags right here. Step 49, we're going to select this class in our CSS. We'll set the width to unset. And you can see it doesn't matter which order it is because of the class. And we can move on to step 50. We're going to add some space between our input fields that have the class inline by adding a margin. And it's supposed to be only added to the right margin. So again, it's clockwise. The first value is top, second is for right, third is for bottom, and the fourth is for the left. So we can write it like this. Step 51. We're going to add a vertical align and set it to middle. And it's going to be added to our inline class inputs, so the one in the second field set. To be honest, I don't see much of a difference here. But that's what freecodecamp wants us to do. So let's confirm it. Step 52. We're going to change the background color of our input and text area. So we'll select them both, separated with the comma, curly brackets, background color as a property. Let's add this value. And we are also going to change the border. Step 53. We can't see the text that well if we type something in. So I've written something right here, but you can't see it. So we need to change the color. We're in our input and text area selectors, and if we now write something in, we can see it. We'll also change the minimum height. So our field is now a bit bigger. Step 54. Alright, we're going to change the minimum height of our dropdown here. How can we do that? At first we'll need to find it, it's here. And we can just Ctrl X, cut it out, and paste it into this group. And then we're good. Let's move on to step 55. We can also use attribute selectors. As far as I know, we haven't used that in freecodecamp up until now. Let us find what we'll have to select. It's this input field of submit. So we can use type or value as an attribute to select. And this is how it's written. So we write input, then use these brackets. And afterwards, as I've said, we could use type as an attribute, selector, or value. Doesn't matter much here. Let me use type. And as a value, we've given it submit. Now curly brackets, and we'll add our properties. Display block, and width of 60%. and it has worked for our submit button, so everything was correct. We can move on. By the way, it doesn't really matter if you use a low cap S or not, so this isn't case sensitive, but it's best practice to use it the same way as you've used it in HTML. Let's move on to step 56. We'll need this part of our code. Here we've set the margin to top, bottom 0 and left, right auto. And we can use the same here. Step 57. We are still targeting our submit button. Let's change the height. Let's change the font size as well. And now it looks way better. We can move on to step 58. Now we'll need to change the background color and the border color. Step 59. Still working on our submit button. We'll change the margin property. 1 EM for top and bottom, so it's the first value right here. And left and right remains auto. That's fine. And we also need to adjust the width. So it's 60% in general. Or we need a minimum width of 300 pixels. Step 60. So these fields, they look a little bit different depending on what type they've got. Therefore, we'll need to adjust that by hand right here for our file type input, where we could upload a profile picture. Let's check it once again. Where was it? It's in our third field set. Right here. We need the input, and if we want to select it, we could use the ID, the type, or the name as attribute selectors. I'll just go with the name. We'll change the padding. But first, if you've gotten lost, we've done something similar right here for the submit button. So you write it the same way. And I could also use the type here as well. It's also called file. So we'll adjust the padding. Let's have a look. And we go with this one, so 1 pixel top bottom, 2 pixels left and right. Step 61. We are still not happy with our submit button, but this time we're going to adjust the form. Change the distance between the form and the submit button, and we'll just use padding top for it. Bottom, of course. I should have read that carefully before typing it in, but it's obviously bottom, because this is where our submit button is. Our step 62. We're going to change the color of our link. We could do so in many different ways, or we can use A, so the link as the selector, and add this color. And that's it. This was the 4th course in our responsive web design certification right here in freecodecamp.org. As always, go through this yourself and use my walkthrough as a guide when you get stuck. I hope this video was helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.